Welcome to the reading of the Sabbath School lesson for the second quarter of 2022. Welcome to lesson number 12 in the series on Genesis. It's titled Joseph, Prince of Egypt, ready for teaching on June 18, and I'm Percy Harrold. Sunday, June 12, Joseph's rise to power. For Joseph, Pharaoh's dreams revealed what God was about to do in the land, we read in chapter 41, verse 28. Joseph, however, does not call on Pharaoh to believe in his God. Instead, Joseph's immediate response is action. Joseph proposes an economic program. Interestingly, only the economic part of Joseph's discourse is retained by Pharaoh, who seems more interested in the economic lesson than in the spiritual meaning of the dream and God's role in producing it. Read Genesis chapter 41, verses 37 to 57. What is God's place in the success of Joseph? Genesis 41, beginning at verse 37. So the advice was good in the eyes of Pharaoh and in the eyes of all his servants. And Pharaoh said to his servants, Can we find such a one as this, a man in whom is the Spirit of God? Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, Inasmuch as God has shown you all this, there is no one as discerning and wise as you. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall be ruled according to your word. Only in regard to the throne will I be greater than you. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, See, I have set you over all the land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh took his signet ring off his hand and put it on Joseph's hand, and he clothed him in garments of fine linen and put a gold chain round his neck. And he had him ride in the second chariot which he had, and they cried out before him, Bow the knee! So he set him over all the land of Egypt. Pharaoh also said to Joseph, I am Pharaoh, and without your consent no man may lift his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zaphnath-Paaneah, and he gave him as a wife Asenath, the daughter of Potiphera, priest of On. So Joseph went out over all the land of Egypt. Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh and went throughout all the land of Egypt. Now in the 7 plentiful years the ground brought forth abundantly. So he gathered up all the food of the 7 years which were in the land of Egypt, and laid up the food in the cities. He laid up in every city the food of the fields which surrounded them. Joseph gathered very much grain, as the sand of the sea, until he stopped counting, for it was immeasurable. And to Joseph were born 2 sons before the years of famine came, whom Asenath, the daughter of Potiphera, priest of On, bore to him. Joseph called the name of the firstborn Manasseh, for God has made me forget all my toil and all my father's house. And the name of the second he called Ephraim, for God has caused me to be fruitful in the land of my affliction. Then the 7 years of plenty which were in the land of Egypt ended, and the 7 years of famine began to come, as Joseph had said. The famine was in all lands, but in all the land of Egypt there was bread. So when all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried to Pharaoh for bread. Then Pharaoh said to all the Egyptians, Go to Joseph, whatever he says to you, do. The famine was over all the face of the earth, and Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold to the Egyptians. And the famine became severe in the land of Egypt. So all countries came to Joseph in Egypt to buy grain, because the famine was severe in all the lands. Pharaoh selects Joseph to take charge, not so much because he has interpreted his dreams correctly and revealed the forthcoming problem of the land, but because he has a solution to that problem, because his advice was good, it said in verse 37, an opinion also shared by Pharaoh's servants. Pharaoh's choice seems to have been more pragmatic than religious, and yet Pharaoh recognizes that the presence of the Spirit of God in verse 38 is in Joseph, who is qualified as discerning and wise in the following verse 39, an expression that characterizes the wisdom that God gives. As we read in Genesis 41, verse 33, "Now therefore let Pharaoh select a discerning and wise man, and set him over the land of Egypt." And 1 Kings chapter 3 and verse 12, "Behold, I have done according to your words. See, I have given you a wise and understanding heart, so that there has not been anyone like you before you, nor shall any like you arise after you." All the details reported in the biblical text fit the historical situation of Egypt at that time. Politically, the fact that Pharaoh appoints Joseph as vizier is not unusual in ancient Egypt, where cases of foreign viziers have been attested. The next 7 years are years of abundance in such a marked way that the grain production becomes immeasurable, as you read in verse 49, a sign of supernatural providence. The comparison as the sand of the sea in the same verse reveals that this is God's blessing. Let's read Genesis 22, verse 17. "Blessing I will bless you, and multiplying I will multiply your descendants as the stars of the heaven, and as the sand which is on the seashore, and your descendants shall possess the gate of their enemies." Joseph personally reflects that blessing in his own fruitfulness, a coincidence that evidences the presence of the same God behind the two phenomena. Joseph has 2 sons whose names show Joseph's experience of God's providence, which has transformed the memory of pain into joy, Manasseh, and the former affliction into fruitfulness, Ephraim. What a powerful example of how God turns something bad into something very good. And so to finish today, what are ways that others should be able to see from the kind of lives that we live the reality of our God? This lesson was read by Dr. Percy Harrold for Christian Services for the Blind. Sponsored by the Sabbath School Department and distributed through Hope Channel Australia, this podcast is also redistributed by Hope Channel Germany, Christian Record Services for the Blind, and It Is Written. It is also available on SoundCloud and through multiple podcast distributors, including Apple iTunes. Remember, God is always faithful.